Well, we're just going to jump in. I think we're going to catch up on some time here. The panel topic, as we discussed, is really leveraging advanced analytics in our respective missions in health. We have a great representation on the panel. We have a health association, a health agency, and a healthcare provider. So I think it's a good, diverse perspective on this particular topic. So I think it'd be appropriate to learn a little more about Jamie. We're sick of you. We've heard plenty of stories about Mercy. So
I needed a break anyway.
That's right. You needed a break. That's important. So with that, maybe Ken and Todd, if you could just take a couple minutes, tell us a little more about yourself, your background, that would be appreciated.
So I think most people here are probably familiar with the American Red Cross, but may not know the extent of what we do. So, so the American Red Cross has three primary areas of service. The first is biomedical services, which I think we're the largest blood banking organization in the world, definitely in the country. Public health and safety. So we offer courses in areas such as first aid, caregiving, preparedness, aquatics, water safety, things like that. And then there's humanitarian services. So humanitarian services provides assistance to those who are affected by disasters. So I've been with the American Red Cross for 15 years, and I was part of a team that started the enterprise data warehouse. And my role was as a data warehouse architect, and Business Objects was our BI platform. So my very first project was to build a universe for the public health and safety learning management system. And then later I also did universes for some of the biomedical universes, and all of the Oracle financial modules was part of my projects, as well as the data architecture for that. So about 4 years ago, our core team moved into marketing, and the group we moved into is called Marketing Operations and Data Science. And our team within that group is called the Business Intelligence and Data Integration team. And there's just 5 of us on that team. It's a very lean team, and we do basically everything. I mean, we do our own data integration, we do our own semantic layers, we do our own data architecture, professionally authored dashboards, we prepare data for our data scientists and our analysts. And I think that we don't follow any specific methodology, but we are very agile because we're so self-contained. Over the same period that we've been in marketing, the Red Cross, it's kind of like a lot of organizations, moved into a multi-cloud environment. And so we still find value in the data warehouse, but the data warehouse is now part of a larger data ecosystem. And so we do some analytics from our cloud systems as well. So that's basically
Very good.
what I do.
Todd?
My name's Todd Simpson, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at the Department of Health and Human Services. I still have to look because it's a new title, new job for me. I've only been there for about 2 months, and it's pretty much developing a brand new program, doing very much of what I did at the FDA, but on a much larger level. And so this is somewhat a difficult conversation because I'm not with FDA anymore, so I don't know if I should tell you about FDA or the things that we did there while I was there for the 3 years, or if I should focus on HHS and the opportunities there. It gets a little sketchy because at FDA, all the data was owned, at least through the OCIO office at FDA, whereas at HHS there is a chief data officer, and it's a peered position under the chief technology officer, peered to the CIO. So there's a natural division between the data and the operations. And I think that the interesting thing that we're going to uncover in the months and years to come is how we're all going to work together to ensure that we're delivering data as a service to our customers. And that's really the bottom line. I think that I have a pretty good sense of what our customers need. I have, like I said, several use cases at FDA where we solved big problems by introducing the tool sets that we're talking about today. It's always difficult. You try to stay technology agnostic and you're at a SAP conference. So, it's impossible to do so. But HANA is obviously a big part of what we did at the FDA. And the business objects, along with a lot of license reconciliation and basically a review of all of those disparate SAP products and bringing them all together on unified platforms. That was probably the biggest stuff that we did at the FDA. And I think from that experience, when I look at data as a service, I know our customers need access to the tools to do the advanced analytics, the predictive modeling, and our customers are thirsty for artificial intelligence. So that's going to be the vein that I operate in from a data perspective in this new role as CPO. And I'm going to collaborate clearly with the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Technology Officer as much as possible, because I think they've done a lot of great work establishing vehicles for our customers to leverage the different vendors out there and the tools that are available to them. So we're trying to find ourselves in this new, I'm going to say reimagined HHS, because that's all this is. I'm sure you've heard about the reimagining HHS. And what this basically is an opportunity for us to think a little bit smarter about how we're going to provide services from a higher level to the customers so we can really truly exploit those economies of scale. And just to wrap this up, so the purview of the Chief Product Office and my pitch and why I really wanted to be here in front of industry today is just to kind of let everyone know that the Chief Product Office has all vendor management, all HHS shared services, all brokerage services. There's a host of special initiatives tied to the position, like EHCM, the Human Capital Management Project, which has just been going on and on for years now. And of course, there's this huge pipeline DevOps microservices piece that I'm building. So that's the office. I'll talk more about it in a little bit, but for introductory purposes, that should do.
Very good, thank you. So Jamie, I'm presuming there are no hidden gems of background that we haven't unveiled, so maybe an interesting segue to the next discussion is really talking about some of the use cases that you've seen having a pretty big impact on your organization. Todd talked to this new concept of insight as a service. I know Mercy has done a lot of work in that arena. There's a lot of interest from the device and drug companies that are looking for real-world data to make sure that they truly can impact outcomes from a cost and quality perspective. So maybe you can elaborate on that discussion.
Yeah, so for several months now, we've been in a partnership with a company called Medtronic, you may have heard. We've in partnerships with a couple other companies that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. But Medtronic is very interested in outcome data, right? So when you used our devices, how did it turn out, right? Did the patients get better? Did they improve? How do they compare with other devices? Things like that. And so Mercy, in an effort to improve patient outcomes and to help take better care of our patients, are sharing some of that data with Medtronic, right? And we've done forms of this for years, right? What we're doing differently now is we're using the SAP HANA Cloud platform as the mechanism for that sharing, right? So instead of, they ask a question, we batch it up and push it out to an FTP site where they go download it and do all that stuff. We are, every day we're just putting that chunk of data up into the cloud. They can connect to it and do what they want. Now, it's still, I would say, a relatively immature model for that, right? So, not a lot of bells and whistles. It's just sort of, there it is. You can hit it when you want to instead of having to take it when we want to give it to you. But our goal is to really get to that insight as a service, right? Where we've we've got, sort of that beautiful insight like we built for our internal customers, to where they can go in and get the information that they want on demand, ask their own questions, in a meaningful and actionable way. So, and that's really, a big question for a lot of U.S. healthcare is really how to manage that data, right? Because, like Walt said, device manufacturers, pharma, the FDA, we do a lot with them in terms of those data feedback loops. Is just how do we do that better, faster, stronger as we move forward to help lower the overall cost of healthcare, to help improve the overall quality of healthcare. So
that's perfect. And just kind of adding on to that a little bit, it's more about the curated data. It's more about the insight. It's more about the dark analytics, the unstructured part of the world in healthcare that over the 10 years, Mercy's been able to build some algorithms around what is in a chart or a note that is relevant to an outcome, a decision. So that is extremely valuable and not readily available in the marketplace. So that's kind of an important plug. So with that, maybe shifting over to Ken, if you want to talk a little more about some of your compelling use cases.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, the American Red Cross has several lines of business, areas of service, but those areas of service operate like separate lines of business. They have their own management teams. They have their own systems that contain their own customer data. They even have their own marketing groups. So there's a Red Cross term that we use for people who engage with one of our lines of service, and we call them our constituents. So as examples, for biomedical services, our constituents would be blood donors. For public health and safety, our constituents would be people who either take courses or are organizations which are authorized to provide Red Cross courses. And in humanitarian services, our constituents would be either those who are financial donors or those who volunteer to give their assistance to a disaster operation. So a few years ago, we discovered something which is very surprising, a couple things about our constituents. The first is that there is very little overlap between people at the Red Cross, our constituents who engage in more than one area of service. So for instance, those who are financial donors, a very small number of them actually are blood donors as well. And of our blood donors, a very small percentage of theirs are course takers. And of the course takers, a very small percentage of theirs, let's say, volunteer for disaster operations. And the other interesting thing that we discovered is that those constituents who do engage with the Red Cross in more than one area of service are much more committed. They're much more loyal. And so there's a lot of value to them. But a few years ago, we didn't even know this. And the reason we didn't know this is because our separate lines of business own their own customers, so to speak, right? And even if we had known that, there was no universal constituent ID that went across the entire organization. And even if there was, we really wouldn't have understood what were the factors that led to how they engage with us in different ways. So about 3 years ago, we began sending our customer data to an outside organization to get mastered. So what this means is that we send our data files, and they would match on name and address to people in their database that basically contains everybody in the general population. And from that process, we were able to get a global identification number for all of our constituents. And so after we had a global identification number, then we were able to see, oh yeah, our blood donors, for the most part, are not financial donors. And our financial donors, again, are not course takers. And And then we were also able to see that, again, those constituents who did engage in more than one way were much more loyal. And some of them were even ambassadors for the American Red Cross. So after management understood the value of these constituents who engage with us in more than one way, it became like a directive for our team, marketing operations and data science, to try to broaden those constituents. So the way we did this was, first of all, data science in the most simplistic way is looking at the attributes of something that happened in the past to predict the likelihood of something in the future. So in our case, the attributes we look at, the characteristics of our constituents, to predict how likely they are to give money, give blood, or whatever in response to some sort of marketing campaign. So we collect different kinds of characteristics about our constituents. So for instance, we know what the behavior is of our constituents because we have records of their donation history. So behavioral characteristics might be things like, do they just donate during a disaster? Do they possibly donate monthly? How long have they donated? How much do they donate? Things like that. We also send our data to other organizations to get demographic information about our constituents. So for instance, some of that might be age, marital status, gender, things like that. And then from other vendors, we get other demographic information, which is geographic. So for instance, down to the zip +4 level. So some of that might be things like, what is the average income in that area, or what is the ethnicity typically in that area, or the education level. And actually at the geographic level, surprisingly, there's like over 100 different characteristics that we get for those areas. So our team, the marketing operations and data science team, we build these large profiles that contain all these characteristics. And we use those for our data science team to do predictive models. So, as I said, we had a goal to do marketing campaigns to broaden our constituent base. But the problem we had, the roadblock, was that our customers are kind of owned by the specific lines of business, and they don't want their customers to get over-contacted. So, for instance, if biomedical operations is doing a campaign for blood donations, they don't want their customers to be, for lack of a better word, pestered by humanitarian services for a financial donation, right? So we reached a compromise, and the compromise was that the humanitarian services was able to market to, let's say, 100,000 of the biomedical customers. And, but then the question is, so which 100,000 do we market to? And that's where data science comes in. So our data science has these profiles with all these characteristics. And so they run it through their models, and they see what characteristics correlate closest to a specific campaign. So the process for, let's say last year we did a campaign where we targeted blood donors to give financial donations. So first we do a test campaign, which is with a relatively small amount of data. And with the results of that, we plug it into predictive models, our data science team. With the characteristics which correlate successfully to financial donation, they build a scoring model out of that. And we run that scoring model against all of the blood donors in our profiles. And the 100,000 who basically have the highest scores are the ones that we market to. And so in summary, this whole process, if you mentioned use cases, we get characteristics for all of our constituents. We build these large profiles of all of our constituents with all these characteristics. The data science team then uses that in their predictive models and builds scoring models out of that to determine who we market to. And this is just one use case. Our data science team, because of having all the characteristics, being able to see how they respond to different campaigns, we are much more able to give a personalized and focused marketing now to all of our constituents for every line of business. And I think that right now we're doing this between biomedical and humanitarian services. Hopefully in the future we'll start doing the same thing for public health and safety, where we'll try to find volunteers who are interested in giving blood and things like that. So we're really at the beginning of this, but I think it's been very successful so far.
Very good. Well, it'll be interesting to start to measure those results and how you evolve that from a predictive to more of a prescriptive model. It's common theme, and I'm not telling you any new news, but I do a lot of work with the healthcare providers, the traditional providers and payers in the industry, and they're always talking about the consumer now instead of the patient and customer. And I always come to the table with a kind of a predefined notion that they want to know what we're doing in the healthcare space on this topic, and that's the least of their interest. They want to know what we're doing with Walmart and Under Armour. They really want to understand at point of service what type of analytics, what type of insight could we leverage in reaching out, engaging our patients as consumers of care with a multifaceted type of relationship, because it would be a consumer buying benefits one day, supporting a family member, it could be a patient in an acute situation in the ER or a chronic care perspective. So it's complicated, but the industry is kind of growing to what we've done well in other industries forever. So it's kind of an interesting trend to follow. So with that, Todd, if whatever you're comfortable with, past life, forward life, if you want to elaborate a little more on some use cases.
So I'll be a little more, I'll be generic, but I'm going to talk probably about, there's really nothing new under the sun. People have been using data since the dawn of time to make better decisions. And I think, as Ken was speaking, I could take the steps of his use case and apply it to the same type of analytical problems that we solved at FDA. And I was thinking of another use case at the criminal division back when I first started in government in 2010, where we used, I won't name the platform, but we used very similar process to find out who was basically controlling the value of the dollar, and prosecuted a network of criminals just by applying the analytic power of these tools. But the thought that came to mind most when Ken was speaking, from my perspective, is there's a scientist that I've worked with for the last 3 years at the FDA. She's a remarkable woman. Her name is Anna Zarfman, and I'm going to plug her only because she's done a tremendous amount of work solving problems and protecting the American public. And some of the commercials that you see on TV warning you about drugs and the effects are actually coming out of her office, and the work that she's doing through the application of these technologies. And it was her vision. I remember when I first met her, it wasn't the analysis of the data. She's been with the FDA for 20, 30 years, I think, and she's been solving these problems using Excel for a number of years. And it was her requirement, and I'm not a data scientist. I'm an IT guy at my core. I started my career as an engineer with MCSEs and certifications like that. So I visit my customers and say, how can I solve your problem? And her request to me was, I don't want to spend 10 years solving a problem. Lives are at stake. I want one click. And I guess that's really where I want to kind of leave it. The platforms that we brought into production and offered as services didn't get us to one click by any means, but it definitely got us a lot closer to one click. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, very good. Well, we have a little over 5 minutes. We can open it up to Q&A if there's some questions in the audience. Please.
Okay.
I think we're looking for a mic. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alton King. I'm with the Department of Justice. I previously worked at CDC and SAMHSA, so great that I have my plug for healthcare, and it's rather timely. I want to know, how do you balance data and the personal story? For HHS in particular, one of the biggest grant-making entities there's about $600 billion given out, a lot more in contracting, but how does the individual, like at the patient, I'll use an example of my mother who has a complicated history, but one of the things in looking at cost and analytics is that at her dialysis center, they chose to use betadine wipes versus alcohol, but she was allergic to that, coupled with the gauze to protect her access site, just gauze and tape, versus Tegaderm. Tegaderm is a lot more expensive, but it's far more effective at fighting infection. So there's more than just the data that gets collected. So how do you make sure the patient, the personal story remains?
Sure. So for us, obviously I talked a lot earlier about reducing clinical variation, right? And what that sounds like, if you just dip into it very at a high level, is we're just putting an assembly line together and we're going to treat everybody exactly the same, right? And that's not really the point, right? It's the idea of reducing that variation is really finding out what points in that pathway for your encounter provide value and which ones don't, right? So and knowing when to sort of jump off of that pathway, right? So it's really about appropriate care, right? So if something costs 10 times as much, sometimes it's perfectly, that's the right thing to do. And I think that's where, in healthcare specifically, we really rely on the doctors and the caregivers to do that, right? So my job is to give them enough information to say, okay, here are the treatments that have been appropriate historically for people, for all people, right? And then our next step is to get into people that are similar, right? So, sort of building cohorts on the fly where it's, they're this demography, they have these comorbidities, they have this history. And so for people like that, this particular treatment or course of treatment is 100 times more effective than this other stuff, right? And so even though we'll take a financial hit, the actual outcome of the patient is the most important, right? And so what we've historically struggled with in healthcare is how to scale that in a meaningful way, right? So that it's not just relying on the physician to know everything about that one patient at every interaction, because that's just not reasonable, right? So how do we enable them? How do we get that information in their hands and say, for your mother, she has a history with this, so we know we can't do the betadine, right? We've got to go with the alcohol wipe. And then for the wound treatment, how do we evaluate for her which is most effective and which is going to lead to the best outcome for the best price, right? Because price is actually part of the outcome. So I think it's, we're still very early in how to take that, reduce the variation, and still provide personalized medicine. But that's absolutely where we're trying to get to. Does that make sense? Answer your questions.
Probably have time for one more question.
My name is Elizabeth McGill. I'm with HRSA, and my question is for Mr. Simpson. So how do you envision the adoption of new data products, in particular Tableau, to shape HHS's Reimagine initiative?
So it's a great question. One of the offices inside my program is a vendor management office, and I'm right now working with as many vendors as I possibly can to try to get them to strategically partner with me so that, so let's take Tableau for example. Tableau's out there, it's at FDA, it's competing with other products, and it's tied into business objects, it's tied into some IBM products, it's tied into all kinds of different stuff, and has a lot of potential. And the one thing that we've learned is that in a federated environment such as Health and Human Services, budget authority comes from all kinds of different places, and the customers are going to want to have some choice. So there's always going to be a Tableau. It's not going to be a decision that we're going to make. So knowing that the reality is that our customers want the choice, and that they may want to choose Tableau. What I'm going to do is partner with those vendors to ensure that, number one, they're still out on the Tableau vendors are still out on the street peddling their wares, if you will, at the Optiv level, and making sure that Tableau is included in all the alternatives analyses that are taking place whenever there's a new request or a solution that's required. I just want Tableau to be part of the alternatives analysis so that it's reasonable for our customers to be able to choose between functionality, risk, and price point. And I'd like to establish the vehicles at the CPO office that will bring those services to the customers. Right now, all that work is taking place at the Optiv level. And within the Optivs, there are centers, and so there's a lot of duplication. There are interoperability issues, and there are a lot of data problems, not just at FDA, but at HHS at large and throughout our entire federal government. It's a huge problem that we have to solve together. And I think the approach that we're taking at HHS is a sensible one. We're just trying to take those products and services to the highest level. And I have no qualms with people using procurement vehicles at the lower level, but I think that by developing the strategic partnerships with the vendors, they're going to get better price points and easier access to those services once I get my program off the ground. Does that answer your question a little bit? We can talk more if you have.
Very good. So we're out of bounds. That's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.